This is peace, Michael. Contentment. You need only give me your little finger. Your hair may be white as snow before another opportunity like this presents itself.
If I agree, Matthew, it will be from self-contempt. I feel myself an outcast.
To have a child one must love.
Debased, debauched, depraved, degenerate.
You do whatever you can answer to yourself for. I'd always rather trust.
Debased, debauched, depraved, degenerate.
I can't think of anything that would stand between me and damnation. To myself, I'm the most detestable creature on earth.
Why do you hesitate?
Debased, debauched, depraved, degenerate.
You trouble me, my child.
He has a marvelous head.
I'll be in my room, Michael.
Have you done your homework? Where are you going?
In the moss by the stream.
In memory of your angelic simplicity.
Somebody that I could embrace, that I could tell the whole story to.
Don't hold it against me, Michael.
Don't hold it against me, Michael.
Don't hold it against me, Anne.
Debased, debauched, depraved, degenerate.
Come with us, Michael.
Come with us, Michael.
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 That I could embrace.
Don't hold it against me, Michael.
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 Let's not be sad. It's all so beautiful now.
The path is like a soft carpet. My feet don't touch the ground.
I can't go with you, Matthew. There's so much to be done.
Arthur, it is such a pleasure to have an opportunity to visit with you today. You've worked as an actor, as a producer, as a director and a writer. You've been involved in motion pictures, television, and the theater, as well as other entertainment venues. It's been an extraordinary career thus far. Let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
The Bronx.
Okay.
South Bronx, to be specific. Rather tough neighborhood around Hunts Point, Southern Boulevard. I tell people that our high school sport was run for your life. And I was there until 16. And then my family moved to California. And for some strange reason, insisted I come with them.
Your parents are, what kind of people were they? And what were their backgrounds?
They were second generation. Actually, my father had been born in Latvia, but came over at, I think, the age of 3.
Okay.
My mother was born in Philadelphia. Her parents were from Poland, Austria, depending on what year you checked. It kept changing nationality.
Yes, it's one of those boundaries.
One of those boundaries, yes.
I'm from the same area.
Yeah, and you have to, it's very difficult to know
Yes.
what country the city was in. It was Chernovitz was the name of the city,
Okay.
actually. So they actually, my parents lived around the corner from each other in Philadelphia, but did not meet until they both had moved to New York. So my father was a shoe salesman. My mother was a housewife most of her life, and then went into business, owned a clothing store for a while after we moved out here.
What kind of people were they?
Very, very centered, very responsible. I don't know why that word comes into mind, but it does. Very concerned with my education, very concerned with giving me freedom, giving me the basics of integrity. Both my grandfathers were rabbis, and I did not know my father's father very well. He passed away when I was quite young, but my mother's parents lived with us most of my childhood, and were very honorable people, very respected in the community. I mean, so many times for dinner at my parents' home, my grandfather rather, would invite, you never knew whom he was going to invite. I mean, the local Roman Catholic priest was a guest frequently. Just people from all parts of the community were always coming into the house. So it was a very creative environment, a very respectful environment, and education was always in the forefront.
Were they readers? Did they
They were, my mother was an avid reader. My grandparents were readers. My grandmother was a reader. They were also, I had an uncle. My father's sister was an actress, and her husband was an actor, and he was a major star in the Yiddish theater in New York.
Sure.
With a company called the Yiddish Art Theater, which was headed by a gentleman named Maurice Schwartz. So my first experience of theater was actually Yiddish theater. The first time I saw Macbeth, it was in Yiddish. And so I have very, very exciting memories of going down to Second Avenue, which was the hotbed of Yiddish theater, and seeing wonderful theater, and also seeing a lot of musicals, because my aunt was in musical comedy, and had actually had a vaudeville act with Molly Picon. Molly Picon, who of course went on to have a career in English, in American theater, on Broadway and in films. And so whenever Molly Picon had a new show on Second Avenue, my aunt would invariably be in it. I also saw a lot of shows with an actor named Menashe Skolnick, who also went on to do things on Broadway. So my first experiences that are so vivid in my mind were of Yiddish theater, which was a very, very decided influence in my early life.
Well, people have largely forgotten about Yiddish theater and how important it was
Absolutely.
in formulating a foundation for a lot of Broadway and off-Broadway. Absolutely.
I mean, the actors who came from Yiddish theater were people like Paul Muni, John Garfield, who had their first performance experiences in Yiddish theater. And also the cross-fertilization between the Yiddish theater and the group theater was instrumental. And the group theater went on to become a major influence in my life. My first job in New York, when I moved back to New York after I had done some theater here, was working for Harold Klurman, who of course was one of the founders of the group theater. The major teacher, mentor, influence of my life is Sandy Meisner. And Sandy was a member of the group theater, the original company of the group theater. People like Stella Adler and Luther Adler were key members of the group theater. Their father had been one of the great stars of the Yiddish theater. So there was a tremendous cross-fertilization between the Yiddish theater, the group theater, and the group theater was, of course, even though it did not last more than a decade, was a major influence in the shaping of American theater ever since. I mean, with Elia Kazan and people like Elia Kazan, Elia Kazan's first job in the theater was with the group theater. Yes. But the whole influence that of reality, of realism, of the honesty of performance, rather than the kind of personality-driven performance that had existed before with people like Catherine Cornell, who was basically a personality around which a show would be shaped. The move from that in our theater to the performances of people like Paul Muni and Garfield, and on from there to Montgomery Clift and Brando, was all an influence that was very directly traced to the group theater and the influence that the group theater had, the relationship the group theater had with the thinking of Stanislavski.
Well, I've been struck by the sense of realism
Absolutely.
in that group, that it is a more non-actorly performance style, which was kind of unusual for its time.
It was revolutionary. It was a dramatic change from what had been the previous style, the previous direction of American acting, and of course then became part of our film tradition.
Yes. So the early part of your life is in the Bronx.
Correct.
And in a tough neighborhood.
Yes.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, even without the relative, it was a tough neighborhood. I would get beat up on a regular basis.
Really?
So, yeah, it was a
little anxiety-provoking from time to time.
If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger.
What kind of child were you? What were you like at that time while you lived in the Bronx? What were you thinking about? What were you?
Much too sensitive to live in the Bronx.
Yes.
I had polio when I was a child, so I spent a good number of years actually in hospitals. So I was away from the tumult of the Bronx in the safe confines of a polio ward for about 3 years.
That must have been really influential on you, because that's a lot of time to spend in a hospital situation.
Yes, it was, and I'm grateful for it, because I think that isolation that I experienced was key to the growth of my imagination, to my fantasy life. I read a great deal through that period. I got very hooked on reading plays. I remember telling my parents and the teacher who would come and visit once a week to bring me plays, almost any plays.
Really?
I would ask my parents to just go to the library and bring me the next 4 plays on the shelf, and then I'd give those 4 back, and then I want the next 4. I would read any play, and I think the reason was that I found the structure of a play more fertile for my imagination, because between the dialogue and the descriptions, I could really create the world. And so I just fell in love with reading plays.
I think it's a little unusual for a young teenager to be avidly reading plays.
I wasn't even a teen. I was in pre-teenage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you started out early. Now, did you think at that point, when you were a real young person, that there might be a place for you in being involved in that world or that business?
I don't think I thought that consciously. I certainly knew I loved it because I loved going to the Yiddish theater.
Yes.
I knew I loved reading plays. I think I had a sense that somewhere in that world I would want to find myself. But it wasn't it certainly wasn't a career goal. It just was a love of that world.
Okay. And then what prompted the move to California? Was that a change in employment for your father or something
No,
else?
it was a series of events. I had a cousin who had married a sailor who was stationed in Long Beach. So she moved out to be with her husband. Her mother, my mother's sister, then moved out to be with her daughter. That prompted my sister to want to move out. So my sister, who had gotten married by that time, my sister moved out, and therefore my parents decided that they wanted to be close to my sister. They waited until I graduated from high school, and so it was sort of, it was one element of the family following the previous element of the family.
Sure. And what area did you move to at that point?
We moved, I started college right away. So when I moved out...
and how old were you at?
16.
So you started college very young.
Yeah. It was a strange story. Because I'd been in a hospital for a good number of years and was not going to school and was really self-taught, when it came time for me to re-enter the school system, they gave me a test to see what grade I should be in. And the test results indicated that I should be a grade ahead of where I would have been had I gone to school. So that's how that happened. I moved right immediately to Whittier, which is where I went undergraduate, Whittier College.
Yes.
And my parents lived for a while with my aunt in Downey, and then they moved to Los Angeles, then they moved to La Habra, which was near Whittier.
And how did you like Whittier in college? How did you like that experience?
Whittier is a lovely college. It was and is a very good institution. There's a great tradition at Whittier, having been founded by the Society of Friends, Quakers,
yes,
which I responded to in a very positive way. I must say, overall, I found my academic career disappointing. By the time I left Whittier, I think I had 3 majors. By the time I was a junior, I was teaching about 3 classes. But when I left there and went to UCLA to get my master's, I thought, oh my God, now it's going to get exciting. Now I'm going to go to a big institution with a lot of students from all over the world, and
sure,
now my education is really going to be exciting. And it wasn't. Again, it wasn't. Again, I felt disappointed. So, again, I have positive, wonderful things to say about both Whittier and UCLA, but I can't, in all honesty, say that they excited me academically.
It sounds like you were a little ahead of the curve, too, in terms of your interests and the level you were performing at. Were you an outgoing person or a shy person? Or somewhere in the middle?
I had a reputation, particularly at UCLA, of invite Arthur to a party and with 15 minutes he'll be sleeping in the corner. I've never been a very social person.
And what were you studying when you were at UCLA? What was the master's?
Theater.
Okay. So at that point, you must have made some sort of decision that this might be an area of interest.
Oh, absolutely. When I was at Whittier, actually I took a directing class at Whittier.
Okay.
And it was directing a scene from Glass Menagerie in the directing class. And I can remember the exact moment when I knew I wanted to be a director. I was taking a directing class at Whittier, doing a scene from Glass Menagerie, and it's a scene where Tom has just broken some of Laura's little glass animals.
Sure.
And she's kneeling over the pieces on the ground, and he steps out onto the porch, the fire escape, and has one of the soliloquies. And I was watching that scene from the balcony of the theater on the campus, and there was I had done like a little crossfade of the lights as the scene changed, and both of the young actors were really lovely. The young man was his name was Kent. I still remember his name. Very, very, very nice young man with one lovely quality. The young lady who was playing Laura was actually a girl who was crippled. She was beautiful, angelic face, and physically handicapped. And there was something very touching and moving about them. And
Sure.
And as the lights faded, the lights cross-faded, there was this kind of extraordinary blue haze that just was caught by the meeting of the lights for a second. And I remember watching it from the balcony of the theater and having this intense sense of satisfaction, of having created that moment. And it was a feeling I'd never experienced before, a sense of pride and just I did that. Whatever the did
Yes.
meant, I
created
I
this.
created that. And I knew at that moment that that's what I wanted to do, and I guess I've been chasing that blue haze ever since.
Now, at that point, were you much more interested in theater than motion pictures?
Theater. I was really, my focus, my goal, my aspirations were entirely connected to theater.
Okay.
It wasn't until actually, after I left UCLA, I started a theater company here in Los Angeles.
Was that the next?
That was the next step, yeah,
Okay.
a company called Theater Vanguard. And it wasn't until a show that Theater Vanguard produced here, which moved back to New York, which brought me back to New York, and I started doing theater again in New York. And then one of the two, actually, there were two occurrences because of plays I did in New York that brought me to film. And I was, once I started doing film, I felt very at home. I felt like I had been doing it for ages. And I think part of the reason was that photography had always been a key hobby of mine. So looking through a camera was not a new experience for me.
Right.
Framing something in my mind was not a new experience for me. So I think that I kind of naturally fell into it, and it felt very much at home. But getting back to your question, in my college years, my focus was really almost totally theater.
Okay. Did you go to films very often?
Yes, I did.
And what kind of films did you tend to like at that point?
Two kinds. A film that influenced me tremendously when I was younger was a film called Call Northside 777.
Sure.
Which was a film about a reporter who takes on the responsibility of proving the innocence of this man who's been wrongly convicted. That film had a great impact on me because it was about justice, about the fight for justice, the fight against an evil, the fight against deceit, and it just really appealed to me. Another film that had a great impact on me was the film of Showboat with Katherine Grayson and,
Sure.
and Howard Keel and Margin Gower Champion and Joey Brown. So that really epitomized the two kinds of movie that were my favorite: realism, film noir, and various, just good, realistic, hard-edged drama, and big, lavish musicals.
You had started the theater company, and then what were the circumstances that then took you back to New York?
Well, I had started a theater company because I got my master's at UCLA, taught there for a while, and even while I was getting the master's, I was eager to work, and you pick up the LA Times and you check the want ads, and there aren't any want ads for director. So I decided I had to do it myself. So I got a group of my friends from UCLA, and we found a coffee house in West LA called the Blue Couch. And I went to these people and I said, how about if I put plays on here? What are your slow nights? What hours on the weekend is before the crowd gathers?
Sure.
So I made a deal with the guy to do, I think we did Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, like 7 o'clock, before And we did, the first play we did was The Beautiful People by William Saroyan. And we were supposed to open, I think, for like 2 or 3 weekends. It ended up running about 8 months and made enough money to do the next play, the next play, the next play. At one point, I was running like 4 theaters in LA. And we ended up doing some important stuff. We did the first production in the United States of Victims of Duty by UNESCO. We did the second production in the United States of Endgame by Beckett.
Mm. But then you were on to New York.
Well, I did a musical called Fly Blackbird, which was actually written by one of the faculty members at UCLA, and it was about it was the time of the civil rights movement, and it was about a sit-in, an African-American sit-in in a drugstore down south. And that musical ended up being optioned for New York. And so when that transferred to New York, I used that as an excuse to move back to New York.
And what happened then?
I stayed for a while. I ended up doing one show either on Broadway or off Broadway every year for about, I'm the world's worst chronologist, so about 10 years.
It's very hard sometimes.
Yes. But for about 10 years, I had at least one show in New York every season, sometimes 2. I also had a theater company near Philadelphia in a town called Morristown, New Jersey, which is right near Cherry Hill.
Sure.
And I was very fortunate. I took over. The theater was being run by a gentleman named Mervyn Nelson, who was a dear friend and a wonderful director, and he was leaving, and he said to the theater owner, you know, I think I know the guy who could take over your theater, and so I got the job. And in the course of 2 years, I assembled an extraordinary company. I had Sylvia Sidney, John Beale, Vivica Linfors, Mercedes McCambridge, a really wonderful, wonderful group of people, and did Glass Menagerie, did Little Foxes, did St. Joan, did Romeo and Juliet, did The Tempest, did Dear Me, the Sky is Falling, Nancy Walker. It was an extraordinary experience.
Well, you were very entrepreneurial to do this as well as artistic. Did you get involved in the business side and the financial side at all, or did you have people who could help you with that? Or both?
No, the first play I produced off-Broadway, after Fly Blackbird, I produced a title that will have some resonance with you. I produced The Awakening of Spring, was the first show I elected to produce myself in New York. And it took me a long time to raise the money. The budget at that time, I mean, it's the price of a ticket these days. The budget for it was $21,500 off-Broadway.
Okay.
And it took me about 3 years to raise the money because I had no credits and I was doing this play by Franz Wedekind, you know, not a quick sell. And I ended up, actually at a suggestion of Sandy Meisner's, he said, well, why don't you just get people to give you $50? So I ended up with like, I don't know, 6,000 investors giving me $50 each. And the back of the program was a list of all these investors. But that's the way I ended up raising the money. And but I realized early on that if you want to do, and the same has gone through my career in films, if you want to do projects that mean something to you, that are of value, you've got to make it happen. You can't sit back and wait for the phone to ring.
You know, I meet with young producers or people who want to be producers or want to be directors, and they ask me, well, what does it take to get into the movie business? And the answer is, make a movie.
Exactly.
Figure out, you know, beg, borrow, or steal.
I know.
Do whatever you have to do, make the movie.
I was going to a meeting about 2 months ago now, and the young man sitting at the reception desk had a book, was reading a book called How to Finance Your Independent Film or something like that. And I walked over to him and I took it out of his hand and I said, any way you can. I gave him his book back.
Well, that's the answer. You just have to do it.
Yes, you just have to do it.
You know, it's rather extraordinary. You did it many, many times, kind of on your own as best you could. And the work you were doing is really some amazing source material too that you got to do during that time.
Yes.
So you were working very hard, trying to put these things together and directing a lot. At what point did you start to get involved in films?
2 things occurred. I had done a production of Awake and Sing, the Odette's play, off-Broadway, which was
Yes.
very well received. One of the producers of Awake and Sing was a film guy, a man who made his living in films. And he came to me one day and said he'd just been hired to produce a comedy, a spoof of a kind of Steve Reeves Hercules movies. And would I be interested in directing it? And I'd never directed a film before. And he said it would be $1,000 a week for 9 weeks. And I said, let me read the script, yes. $1,000 a week for 9 weeks was
Sure, that's
very
good
nice.
work.
It was very nice. And that turned out to be my first movie. The second occurrence was I did a play in New York for the American Place Theater, which was just a damn good off-Broadway theater run by Win Hanman. I did a play called Ceremony of Innocence by a wonderful writer named Ronald Ribman. And PBS wanted to do a film of the play because it was well received and an important play. And Ronald, bless his heart, insisted that I direct the film. So those became my first 2 film experiences. Hercules in New York,
Yes,
and Ceremony of Innocence. It's kind of 2 ends of the spectrum.
Hercules in New York, was that an early appearance by Arnold Schwarzenegger?
It was his first movie.
Okay.
And my first movie.
The very first one for you.
Yes. Arnold was delightful. I mean, he had just moved to the United States, just decided to emigrate to the United States under the sponsorship of Joe Weider, who I happened to just meet yesterday, strangely. Who's now 89 years old. And Arnold was charming, delightful. His work on the film was focused, serious, professional, but a very charming, delightful man. Would I have ever guessed he'd become a major movie star? No.
Right.
Would I have guessed he would become the governor of California? Like, really no. But he was a pleasure to work with.
It's a funny world, isn't it?
It's a very funny world. The distributor thought that Arnold's accent was too thick. It was quite thick. And they dubbed his voice and changed his name to Arnold Strong. And that's the way the film was initially released. But then, of course, when Arnold became Arnold, the film was re-released with Arnold's voice and with his name, and has been haunting me ever since.
Well, it's an infamous film.
It is an infamous film, yes.
In certain respects.
Yes, thank you. May I quote you? We can use that on the quote ad. An infamous film.
Well, we all start somewhere.
Oh, God, yes.
And I suspect you learned a great deal from that experience.
It was my first time I had a couple of days' work as an actor while I was in college on a movie set, but you know, as an actor, you don't pay attention to what's really going on. And I remember my first day on the set, I had to say to the AD, tell me when to say action, because I hadn't the slightest idea what I was doing.
Well, you don't know.
You know, we shot the whole thing in Central Park. In fact, if you are foolish enough to watch the film, there is a scene at the gates of hell with Tina L guarding the gates of hell, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the traffic going by on Central Park West. I think we did it for about $35,000. I mean, no, it was a little more than that, but it was done very cheaply. And it's made a lot of money for a lot of people.
Well, it sure has. And then what was the second film?
Ceremony of Innocence.
Okay.
Which was the film version of the play I had done for the American Place Theater. And fortunately, that one I'd be happy for you to look at. It did very well. It was nominated for numerous Emmys, and I had. It's strangely connected to the recent film I've done of The Awakening of Spring, because I really set out with Ceremony of Innocence to do something which was uniquely for television. I was not doing a play for television or a film for television. I was trying to do a television for television. Jack Gould, who was then the very respected TV critic for the New York Times, said that I had proven that in capable hands, television could be its own art form, which I was very gratified, because that's precisely what I had set out to do.
How do you take something that's intended for the theater and transform that into television?
By taking the audience member out of a seat in the auditorium of the theater and bringing them into the experience. You don't photograph it like a play, as if you, the camera, were a member of the audience, because that's false. You have to take the audience member into the experience. At the same time, you're not relying on all the accoutrement of a film. You're not you're not imitating real life, as it were. Most films are an imitation of life, in that the countryside is pretending to be Georgia, or even if you're shooting in Burbank, you're pretending to be some other place. When you're doing the kind of theater for television or television for television, you're not pretending to be somewhere other than where you are. Whatever that is, that's where you really are, and you're not asking the audience to believe that this soundstage is a farmhouse in Connecticut. It is what it is, but still you're not sitting out in a house looking at this in a proscenium. You are in the experience. Those are the two essential criteria. Number one, that your physical location is not imitating another location, and that your audience member is in the experience, not outside the proscenium.
I have always wondered, to a certain extent, why theater works, because it is such an artificial setting, yet the emotional experience can really resonate.
Absolutely.
Why is it that happens, do you think?
Because it's alive. Because it's happening. First of all, you accept the fabrication. You accept the convention. But if the experience is successful, you accept it and forget it. And the reality of what happens on stage, the fact that it's really happening, and happening in front of you in a way that it will never happen again. It's never happened before precisely that way.
Yes.
It will never happen again precisely that way. That element of time, that element that this moment is going to slip away and be gone forever, is what is intensely intriguing about theater. That it happens only once, and you are there. And it is that reality that must infuse the performance. And the fact that you're present at that moment, which is going to vanish in a moment.
It really is an instance of being in the moment.
Absolutely.
Which is the way one's supposed to live one's life.
And the way one is supposed to act. To be in the moment is the key to a fine performance. To be truly present, to let life happen to you, to not to come on stage having pre-designed every moment, and I'm really parroting Sandy Meisner now. The most important moment in a performance is the moment before you come on, or the moment before you step into the camera, step in front of the camera, where you get yourself present, emotionally, psychologically, in terms of your understanding of the character. You bring yourself to that presence. Then you go on stage and you let life happen.
Well, then to a certain extent, being a theater director, you have to be comfortable with change, with constant evolution of process.
Absolutely.
And just kind of go with it.
Absolutely. Before I go, about a week before I start shooting a film, I can go through the script and tell you every shot I'm going to do. The night before I do a day shooting, I can tell you every shot I'm going to do the next day. I then arrive on the set and it all changes. But unless I had that foundation of planning, I wouldn't be free to change. But you have to change. You have to allow the actors to live. You have to allow the scene to live. And that is what works for me. What I set out to do, I think it is my primary job function, to make the audience care about the people on stage or on screen.
How do you direct, do you direct actors differently in film and theater?
In theater, you have a period of time, rehearsal period, 4 weeks, hopefully, in which to create a character, create a situation and a cast of characters that will last, that will carry the cast from performance to performance to performance, and will survive the variables that will necessarily occur between performance. In film, it's different. I need to get it once, essentially. I need to create a performance any way I can. If I need an actress or an actor to be hurt and vulnerable, I need them to be hurt and vulnerable for the next 15 minutes. And if I can make them hurt and vulnerable for 15 minutes, they don't have to do it for me tomorrow. They just have to do it for me right now. Right. So my technique in creating that is different. The truth I'm after is ultimately the same, but the very nature of the medium asks me to get to that truth in a different way.
I would think that there would be some adjustment as you move between theater and film. Do you find that it flows naturally between the mediums? You know intuitively and exactly what you need to do because you've been doing it for a while now?
By this point, yeah. I mean, I'm standing next to a camera, I know what I'm doing. I'm in a rehearsal room for a play. It's not a conscious process I go through any longer.
And I know that you've also done a great deal of television series work.
Yes.
And is that different yet from movies and theater, or is it all part of the same continuum?
It's different in that you have like no rehearsal time. If you're doing a feature, you're doing 3, 4, 5 pages a day maybe. If you're doing episodic television, you're doing 8, 9 pages a day. You have to really know how to use that time effectively.
When did you start doing television series work? How did
Hill
that
Street
come about?
Blues.
Okay.
I had done a series of short movies for ABC, for all the ABC, NBC, and CBS. They were called after-school specials, and they were wonderful because they really said to you, here's 60 minutes, go make a movie. And I got to do some wonderful ones, and they were very gratifying. And I could bring my own style to it. It was like a shorter movie.
Okay.
From that, I was asked to do Hill Street Blues, and that was my first episodic television. It was like really being, it's not only the top of the heat, but the hottest part of the fire. I mean, it was a very successful show,
yes.
A very challenging show, and I was really thrown right into it. That was my first episodic show. I then went on to do, it's a rather frightening statistic, I think I've done 22 different episodic shows. I haven't done episodic in some years, but for the period of time I was doing, not 22 different episodes, I did multiple episodes of many of them, but actually 22 different series, which I find a rather frightening thought at this point in my life.
Well, and you've made many, many movies as well.
It's 53, 54, something like that.
That has been an extraordinary career so far. I mean, one of the problems for directors in this business is they don't work very often. It is not uncommon for a director to go 4 or 5 years before his or her next picture
I'd go
comes
mad.
in.
I'd go mad and I'd drive everyone near me to have me incarcerated.
Well, one of the nice things about the studio era is that
they were so lucky. They were so fortunate. I have had that thought so many times. If I had been fortunate enough to existed in that era with all the evils of the studio system, and there were many, but still you got assigned film after film after film, and you had a chance to grow and to fail and to succeed. You didn't have to go make every one of them happen. They were assigned to you. That would have been a great treat for me.
Well, in addition to the fact that you're incredibly capable and dependable, why do you think you work so much?
I've never gone over budget or over schedule.
Well, that's a very useful thing.
It is indeed.
And very few people can say that.
Very few. I help create performance. I think the thing that if I can cite anything that stands out in my work, and that's a dangerous thing for anyone to do, but I'll take the chance, is that I have helped create outstanding performances. And therefore I have developed an allegiance from actors. I mean, there are actors who very happily will come do a film for me because I pick up the phone and ask them to, because we have a rapport, and they know that I will take care of them and that we will do good work.
With respect to films, how do you start out? How do you prepare?
I cannot describe the casting process for me in any way that's intellectually satisfying, because it's not an intellectual process for me. It's a very intuitive process. I don't expect actors to come into readings and give me a performance. It kind of makes me go the other way when they do. What I do expect an actor to do, and hope an actor will do, is come to a reading and let me get a sense of them, who they are, their availability, their sense of truth, certainly, which is key, but their emotional availability, their integrity, just who they are as human beings. But casting is there's a great quote from Kazan in an interview, and the interviewer asked him about the scene in the back of the cab in On the Waterfront between Steiger and Brando. That could have been a contender scene. And the interviewer said to him, what did you do? What did you say? What did you do to get those performances? And Kazan's answer was, I cast them. And it's absolutely true. It is a major decisions that have to be made. And I trust myself after years of doing it, and I think doing it well. I trust my intuition in terms not only of the individual actor, but the coupling of actors. You don't cast roles, you cast combinations of people. But that's key.
I tend to be incredibly sympathetic to these actors who come in, because it is
horrible. It's horrible. Horrible.
Awful.
It's awful. It's you never know what the people are expecting. And some directors, particularly in television, expect the actor to come in wearing the costume and giving the performance.
Right.
And there's no way of knowing what costume the director wants you to wear. And so it's really it's a very difficult process. But the reason I've used numerous actors over and over and over is because I know I can depend on them, and any sensible director does. I mean, not that I, by any stretch of the imagination, I'm going to compare myself to John Ford, but look at John Ford's films and see that rep company that he created. Any director of any substance has a group of people that he knows he can depend on. He knows they're going to understand him or her in shorthand. It's suicide if you don't do that.
Once you've started principal photography, how do you like the set to operate? Do you tend to be quiet or noisy? Does it tend to be organized or disorganized? What do you think?
It has to be happy, first of all.
Okay.
It has to be safe. It has to be a place where every actor, and the other ones whose face is going to be on that screen, where every actor feels he or she can take a chance, can try something. It has to be a safe place. It has to be a happy place. It has to be a well-organized place, but not well-organized in a way that cramps you, well-organized in a way that frees you. And it has to be a place where I am the emperor. I'm not the prince, I'm not the king, I'm the emperor. It's not a democracy. And that has to be very clear. Mm-hmm. And I try to make it clear not by saying that, but just by commanding my space and making certain that everyone knows that the decisions are in my hands.
Well, at this point, you've done so much work and you're so experienced that, I mean, your gravitas and just the way you carry yourself, I suspect helps a great deal in that regard. People know who you are, and that carries the day. When you started out directing pictures, did you experience nervousness or anxiety? Did you wonder whether you knew what you were doing?
Uh-huh. In fact, the reason I have, even just theater, I mean, I was very young when I was directing people like Sylvia Sidney.
Yes.
And that's the reason I grew a beard initially, was to look older. And I remember working with Sylvia and sitting out in the house and saying, well, I don't really like what she's doing there, but oh my God, that's Sylvia Sidney, and I'm 12 years old. But then the next sentence to myself was, but I'm also the director, and she wants a director, and she needs a director, so I've got to do what my job asks me to do.
Yes.
So, but yeah, initially I was, I don't think I was ever, it's not in my nature. You're asking me questions that if I answer them honestly, I might be accused of having a significant ego, but I'll answer them honestly. It's not in my nature to be outwardly reticent or to be outwardly, I may be inwardly nervous, but I don't show it.
Yep.
So even when I had to ask the first AD, when do I say action, I don't think the cast knew that I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Sure.
You know, so it's just, and that too, I think comes from years of not being able to walk, and
Yes.
and dealing with. I mean, I remember when I was finally back home, I was supposed to go to a hospital for a school rather, for children with disabilities, and for like 2 days I was picked up in a bus with other kids who weren't able to walk or had similar disabilities, and finally I told my mother I couldn't do that. I wanted to go to a regular school. So I went to a regular school, but I couldn't walk. So I had to act as if I could walk. So you learn.
One of the most useful things, I think, for a young person to learn going into new situations and stressful situations is that you never look as nervous as you are.
Oh, absolutely. Whistle a happy tune.
And if you can recognize that no matter how terrified you are inside, and you have a hard time keeping your hands from shaking,
Yes.
you look a lot calmer than you are. And if you understand that, you can get through it.
Yeah, don't let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
Never.
And they don't see you sweat as long as you carry it
And
on.
it's not just dealing with actors or crew, it's dealing with producers sometimes. You know?
Yes.
You know, you just have to stand up for what you believe and not in the back of your mind let the lady or gentleman know that what you're thinking is, oh, if I tell them what I really think, I may get my ass kicked out of the door, but
yes.
You got to do what you got to do.
Music seems to play an important part in your pictures. You
Major.
seem to really appreciate
Thank
music.
you.
Where does that come from, do you think?
I love music. I live with music. I wanted to be a conductor, actually, was one of my earliest ambitions. Music is my life. I love music, and it's constant companion.
What kind of music do you tend to listen to or enjoy?
Everything except rap, because I've yet put that in the category music. I know that I should, and maybe someday I will, but I haven't yet.
How involved do you get in the editing and post-production process?
Extremely.
of your films? Okay.
I'm very, well, first of all, you have to accept the fact that what am I responsible for as a director? And there's only one answer to that, and it's everything. 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 And so every cut, every decision as to whether it's a single or a two or tight or loose or whatever, it's all my responsibility. So I work with editors whom I trust. I want their, you know, I don't, whether it's an editor or a DP or any element of the creative process, I don't want a yes man or a yes woman. I want to say, well, I think we should cut from here to here at this point. I think the cut should be right there. And then I want an editor who'll say, yeah, Arthur, that'll work, but how about if we try it? You know, I want that, you know, that building on, but ultimately the decision is mine. So there's not, if I see something in a movie that I've made years ago and I don't like the way a certain edit occurs, it's my fault.
Sure.
So I'm intensely involved.
You've mentioned Sandy Meisner
Yes.
a number of times. How did you meet him, and how did that relationship come about?
Friend of mine, not a friend, but my partner for about 16 years, was a wonderful actor named Robert Salvio.
Yes.
And I had lived through a number of dreadful acting teachers that Rob came back and would come back home and complain about. And then he got into Sandy's class. I don't really remember how Rob got into Sandy's class, but Rob was studying with Sandy, and he was raving about him. And Rob did not rave easily. I mean, Rob was a very gifted man of great intelligence and taste, and he just thought the world of Sandy. So I called Sandy one day and I said, look, I don't want to be an actor, I'm a director, but I need to know the acting process as intimately as I possibly can. May I sit in the back of your classes and just watch? He said, no, I don't do that. Yeah. I called him about, I don't know, 7 or 8 times, and I got no's every time I called. And then one day I went to the neighborhood playhouse where he taught, where he had been teaching for many years, and early in the morning, and I sat down in front of his door. And he came walking up the stairs. I remember it very vividly. He came walking up the stairs, and I said, my name is Arthur Seidelman. Of course, he had heard my name over and over in these phone calls, and I think Rob had also been nudging him about me. So he came, I said, my name's Arthur Seidelman. He said, okay. And then for 3 years, I sat in the back of Sandy's classes 3 times a week, both at the neighborhood playhouse and at his private studio, which was near Carnegie Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And we became very dear friends, and he was my mentor and teacher, and till the day he died.
Well, one of the greats, very unique in his approach to things. And
A genius of a teacher.
yeah.
Being a teacher is a rare and extraordinary thing, and Sandy was a brilliant teacher.
Mm-hmm. Arthur, you've been involved in so many projects and have so much work. It's difficult to pick ones to talk about, but I'd like to have you comment, if I could, on a few of the films that,
Sure.
of yours that I've watched recently. Porto Vuarte Squeeze.
Hate that title.
What does it mean exactly?
Exactly. Yes, that's the question I ask. It's the name of the novel that the film script is based on. So we inherited the title, but it sounds like some kind of version of Orange Juice. I really don't know.
Yes, but it's a very good film.
Thank you.
You have an excellent cast.
Indeed.
In it, led by Harvey Keitel and Scott Glenn.
Correct.
How did that film come about?
I was hired by a lady named Carolyn Chambers, and we developed the screenplay. Richard Alfieri, who's a writer I've worked with a lot, came in and did the screenplay and did an admirable job. And we shot it in Mexico. And I enjoyed working in Mexico enormously. I like the crews very much. They're hardworking, lovely people. And so, yeah, it was a job that I was hired for, not something that we developed, except once I was hired, we then had to come up with a screenplay.
Sure.
And I suggested Richard, and Ms. Chambers read some of his stuff or saw some of his films and enthusiastically went with him. And I think he delivered a great screenplay.
The young actress who was in the picture,
yes.
Is she a Mexican?
She's Mexican, yes.
She is?
Yes. She's absolutely wonderful. Her name is Giovanna Zacharias.
Another actor we don't see very often is Craig Wasson.
Craig actually introduced me to Carolyn Chambers. I directed Craig on stage in The Sisters, which we later made into a film, which Craig wasn't in, but he was in the film on stage at the Pasadena Playhouse. I mean, when it was a play. He was then in another film I did with Dick Crenna and Angie Dickinson, and we became friends. And he knew Carolyn Chambers because some hometown connection in Eugene, Oregon, and suggested me to Carolyn. Craig spends most of his time in the Midwest now, but he's a wonderful actor and a very lovely man.
You know, we used to see him quite a bit in the 80s and early 90s, and he always gives a really interesting performance. Sort of unsure of himself. Yeah,
always
always
unexpected. Always you totally honest. Very giving emotionally. He's a very good actor.
I wish he worked more. Because,
Me too.
Even now, because I've liked him quite a bit.
He's a good actor.
You've mentioned The Sisters.
Yes.
And you've done that on stage.
Correct.
At least a couple times.
Twice.
And then most recently as a film.
Right.
With really an extraordinary cast.
Amazing cast.
And
Maria Bello, Mary Stuart Masterson, Eric McCormick, Erica Christensen, Tony Goldwyn, Rip Torn, Chris O'Donnell. I'm forgetting a few, but
Stephen Culp.
Stephen Culp.
Elizabeth Banks.
Thank you. Yes. Really blessed with a great cast.
How did that happen with that film and that cast?
We did the play on stage, which was very gratifying. But then Richard, it's also both the play and screenplay by Richard Alfieri. Richard and I said to each other, okay, this is a 12-character play. Doing a 12-character straight play is not easy these days. Maybe regional, maybe college. In New York, very difficult.
Sure.
So we said, let's do a film. And Richard wrote a screenplay. I showed the screenplay to Carolyn Chambers, the same woman for whom we had done Puerto Vallarta Squeeze, and she said, let's make a movie. And she was very supportive and did not ask Richard or me to reconceptualize, to say, take, you know, open it up, more scenes. She really allowed the film to keep its integrity. Then we were doing it for very little money. We did the film for under $5 million with that cast. But the roles are so exciting and the dialogue is so brilliant that actors were not saying no, because the opportunity to do that kind of material is so rare.
Yes.
So we shot it in Eugene, Oregon, even though it's supposed to be New York, but I think we carried that off with the help of a great production designer and a great cameraman.
Yes.
And Stephen Altman was the production designer, who was Robert Altman's son, who was a wonderful designer. And the DP was the same DP who did Puerto Squeeze, a wonderful Mexican DP named Chuy Chavez. I often have said to producers, as we develop a film and we get into a discussion, I've said, well, look, I've already seen the movie. I'm the only one who's seen the movie. And so trust me. And the job is, after you've seen the movie, to create a film that duplicates what you've seen. It's never going to be exact, but to make that film in your mind. With the sisters, I really feel that I created the film I started out to create, and I'm very pleased and proud of it for that reason.
Well, I saw it twice, and I actually enjoyed the second time more than the first time, and I had listened to your commentary in between, which caused me to focus on different things, because
Yes.
you were focusing on different things. But I love the performances.
They're extraordinary.
And the characters, you tend to believe those characters, even in what are, in some cases, overwrought and highly dramatic circumstances.
Absolutely. And what the intention was, first of all, it's a modern variation on The Three Sisters by
Sure.
Chekhov. And the intention was to use, I mean, when you compare the two scripts, Richard's script for Puerto Squeeze and Richard's script for the sisters, or I can mention other of his work, but the language is so different between the two. And what the intention was in the sisters is to create a language mode that was emblematic, that was relevant to these people who live in this very isolated, academically, it's a college campus, and they feel very protected and kind of superior because of their intelligence. Whereas you find that they're vulnerable to all the same fears and sensitivities and anger and pain that we all are, and the language is not a protection. Yeah. Your intellect will not protect you. So it's a unique work, and we were very gratified. I mean, we were in like 20 or 30 film festivals. We won so many major film festival awards, and it was very gratifying. And I think the cast is, I think Maria Bello is extraordinary in the piece.
Yeah. Well, and the relationship between her and, is it Tony Goldwyn?
Tony Goldwyn,
where
yeah. Yeah.
I've never seen him as good as this.
I agree.
And he is totally believable.
Yes.
And you believe the two of them.
I know.
And she's terrific.
She's amazing.
I'd like to meet a girl like that.
Oh,
I mean,
please.
She's pretty amazing.
And she's so beautiful. I mean, she burns a hole in the screen with her sexuality, and her body is just this instrument. She's an amazing lady.
Well, you know, it's not a sexual movie, but
No.
she is so
Sexy.
provocative.
Absolutely.
And when she does the most casual of things, like putting on her shoes or crossing
Yes.
her legs or whatever.
I know.
It's
glorious.
It's amazing. And then Elizabeth Banks, just the little subtleties and the way she moves her head at different times. I haven't seen, you know, she's very good, but I haven't seen her quite that good either. It's an all-around,
Thank you.
rather amazing ensemble. And
It's a really wonderful cast. I was very gifted.
now, another picture you did about the same time was A Christmas Carol.
Yes, a little different.
Which is a different sort of picture, but you know, a very nice cast with
Kelsey Grammer, Jason Alexander, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Geraldine Chaplin,
Jane Krakowski.
Yes.
Yeah, really,
Jesse Martin.
Yes.
And 15,000 Hungarians.
Lots of people.
Brian Bedford, should mention Brian Bedford. Some wonderful people from British theater.
So was this shot in Budapest?
Budapest, yes.
And how did you carry off the the scenery and the settings, the towns?
The worst, brilliant production team, great CGI work by the Hungarian CGI artists. The most difficult task, we shot in the heat of the summer. I mean, it was like the last scene, God bless us all scene, was like 97 degrees and all these... In the
middle of the winter.
In the middle, yeah. And all these wonderful Hungarian performers with these heavy Dickens woolen clothing on and my running around in Hungarian saying, "You're cold, you're cold." It was not easy, but a wonderful production team, really gifted artists, and I love the people in Budapest. I've done 2 films there. But it was a challenge.
Now, do you like doing musicals?
Love it.
Is it difficult?
Yeah, but so what? I would love to do more musicals on film. I love doing them on stage. I've done a lot of them on stage. The chance to do a musical on film is a great gift.
Well, it's rare, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Someone will carry it off, and unless it's a huge production of some kind.
And the opportunity to capture a wonderful choreographer named Dan Soretta, and the opportunity of capturing dance on screen is a particular challenge that I relish, because it's usually not done well, because dance depends on spatial relationships. I won't go into it in too detail, but if you don't shoot, if someone's leaving the ground and you're not shooting it from the right place, you're not aware of how well or how successfully they're leaving the ground. So the challenge of shooting dance on screen is one that I enjoy dealing with.
A very different sort of film yet, Two Spirits, One Journey, which nominally at least deals with gay characters in the Native American tradition, but other subjects as well.
Yes.
How did this happen?
Well, that's a funny story. The young man who wrote it had been my assistant for a while. He's a Native American a gentleman. His name is Sean Imitates Dog. There was a Native American Film Association that I had done some volunteer work for, judging contests and things of that nature. And Sean called me once, and this is the true story. Sean called me and said, you know, the association is doing a script writing contest, and he was going to enter it. And I said, great, good luck. Called me about a month later and said, guess what, I won. I said, congratulations. And he said, remember you said if I won, you'd direct the film.
Oh.
And I think, to quote me exactly, I said, oh, okay. And I said I would, provided there was a very gifted young man named Chad Richmond that was working for my company, wants to be a director. And I said, okay, I will direct it, but I want Chad to work with me. I thought that would be a good training ground for him as well. It was my first time shooting on high def, and we shot it in like 3 days. And the funniest moment, though, was the first day, well, 2 interesting moments. First day on the set, I turned around, there were like 25 people. I'm used to turning around and seeing 125 people, and it was kind of a revelation. I said, yeah, I can make a movie with just 25 people. But then the second moment was, Sean came up to me and said, have you made your reservations for Saturday? This was on a Friday. We were shooting Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. He said, have you made your reservations for next Saturday? I said, for what? He said, for the screening at Paramount. I said, the what? I had done 1 shot yet. And he wanted to know if I'd made my reservations for the screening the next Saturday. And I was like, wait a minute.
Not quite.
Not quite. We shot it in 3 days. We edited it in a week. We screened it the following Saturday at Paramount. Went back and did some editing after that as well.
Sure.
But it's gone on to festival after festival, and it was at Outfest. There's been a number of other festivals around the world, and it's done very well, and I'm very proud of it. And it's about 2 boys on a reservation who are in love, one of whom wants to acknowledge that relationship and openly, and when he can't, is forced to leave the reservation. And the other boy who is afraid to, and you know is going to live a sad life, because he's going to be living a lie. And no matter if on Monday he's successful in carrying out the lie on Tuesday, he's not going to be successful, and it's going to be a painful life for him. So it's about many things, and it's a story that I'm pleased has touched as many people as it has, and not just gay audiences, but it's been shown in festival Native American. I mean, the first screening in Paramount was largely Native American community, and a lot of older folks and a lot of young people, and I kind of wondered how they're going to react to this film. But again, if you make them care about the characters, make them acknowledge emotionally the love between these two boys and the pain that each of them is feeling, they will not turn away.
I think that's right, and it has been my experience that on a one-on-one basis,
Absolutely.
people are very understanding and very accepting. They want
Absolutely.
to love other human beings.
Absolutely.
It is on a macro basis when you run into, you know, fundamentalism
Yeah.
or other issues that people tend to get very rigid.
Yeah, I've had experience with a wonderful play called 6 Dance Lessons in 6 Weeks by Richard Alfieri that we did originally here in Los Angeles with Uta Hagen and David Hyde Pierce. I then did it on Broadway and West End in London with Claire Bloom. And it's now the most produced play in the world. It's in 20 countries, 12 languages. And it's the story of an older woman who is the widow of a Baptist minister from South Carolina, and her dance instructor, who's this gay ex-chorus boy from New York. And it's a love story. They start out in a very acrimonious relationship, but it ends up being a love story. And the thought that there are audiences now in Istanbul, in Athens, in Prague, in Helsinki, in Tel Aviv, in Tokyo, in cities all over the world who are meeting these people and meeting Michael, the gay man, and never again will they meet or hear that someone is gay or meet someone and not be open to their humanity because they've met Michael. And that's what we can do as artists. We can open people's hearts. We can open their minds by introducing them to other people, not by lecturing them, not by telling them we know better than you, but by introducing them to other people and making them care about those people.
I had that experience with a film that Paul Kalishman and I did many years ago, Gods and Monsters.
Oh, a beautiful film.
Which is it's about as good a movie as we can make.
It's a beautiful, beautiful film.
And I was in North Carolina, and I started talking to a young man, and he said, well, you know, that film changed my life and my family's life, because my mother had kicked my gay brother out of the house, and she saw that movie, and she called him immediately, and it changed everything.
That's all, you know.
And that's all you need. That's all you can ask for.
That's all you need.
And I know in your work, you really work on the personal side and the emotional side. I've seen that in the many movies of yours that I've watched. How have you found being gay in your own life? How have you dealt with that? How did that journey go for you?
It just is. I mean, I never questioned it really. I mean, I guess there was a period when I was I don't know, 11, 12 years old, saying, is this going to last?
Right.
You know?
So you knew at a pretty early age.
Am I going to have a crush on Marty or am I going to move on to Louise? No, it's going to be Marty. But it just was. I mean, I never. It's not something that I discovered any more than I discovered I had two hands.
Right.
It just was. And I never came out because I was never in. I never made a point of having to mention it. I still don't. I mean, it's part of who I am.
Right. How about your parents? How did they become aware, or did they ever become aware?
Well, I think when Rob and I shared the same apartment for 16 years.
They got a clue.
They got a clue. And he was accepted into their home, fully, honestly, openly. They would be annoyed like any in-laws are.
Right.
It's a very in-law, son-in-law relationship.
Yep.
But totally welcoming and accepted.
So in your life, you've just been who you were, and that was enough.
Take it or leave it, this is it.
Yep. You did a film for Paul and I recently, The Awakening of Spring.
Yes.
Which we're so proud to present
Thank you.
to a worldwide audience.
You know something?
What?
Sometimes I wonder why we exist.
I'd rather do anything than have to go to school. I mean, why do we? Just to take exams. And why do they examine us? Just so they can flunk us.
Tell me about that experience, if you would, please.
It was an extraordinary experience, it really was. And I'm not just saying that because we're sitting opposite each other. It was one of the most gratifying creative experiences I've had. Paul and I had been discussing doing plays for television for some time.
Yes.
And he called me and said, okay, we're finally ready to do it, but he said, but it has to be in the can in 6 weeks.
How helpful.
How helpful, yes. And you have $5.32.
The only thing I can say to make you feel better is that's more time he's given to
But he said, do this one, and then we'll do more and give you more time. Yeah. You'll have 4 hours longer next time anyway. But I accepted the challenge. But frankly, what I said to Paul was, we don't have time to acquire the rights to anything or to create a screenplay, but I did The Awakening of Spring off-Broadway many years ago.
Yes.
And I've always thought it was an extraordinarily important, powerful work of theater and work of statement of the human spirit.
Imagine yourself undressing completely in front of someone, even your best friend. You wouldn't do it unless he was doing it too.
If I have children, they'll all sleep in the same room. If possible, in the same bed. Boys and girls. I'll make them help each other dress and undress. And when it's warm, they'll all wear just a little white tunic.
The spirit of the young. And I said, how about if we do my adaptation of The Awakening of Spring, just the way we did it on stage? And he agreed, and that's how we set forward to do it. Given the very short schedule we had, the staff at Regent here was just extraordinary. We were extremely fortunate in the people who came in. It's just a brilliant cast. We rehearsed it for 6 days and shot it in 2.5 days, and I didn't need another minute. The way the cast attached themselves to the roles, the way they challenged themselves, difficult roles. I mean, truly, truly, this is not easy stuff.
Right.
These are difficult, complex characters.
I was lying in the moss by the stream for a long time, just dreaming. The time seemed to go by so fast.
Let's stay here a while. Under the tree here is my favorite spot.
The degree of innocence and hurt and need that they needed to find in themselves was very challenging. But they did so with great humanity and honesty. They really gave themselves to me. And we had an extraordinary experience. I mean, in the course of those few days together, we became a family. And that, I think, is on the screen. I think that's you know, that the camera is it's witchcraft. I mean, the camera is an amazing instrument. The camera reads your soul, and the camera reads behind our facades. Mm-hmm. And when there is integrity and honesty, the camera sees it. And that's what this cast of wonderful people gave to me.
Well, they're entirely believable the whole way through, despite the limitations that you had to work under. It doesn't look that way. It looks like a fully evolved piece.
Well, it was. I mean, really, it was a difficult schedule. I won't, shooting that many pages a day is a challenge.
Yep.
But I finished, and I said, "There's nothing I did not do." The support of your team was really incredible. I mean, I could not have asked for more support, more encouragement, and the fact that we created an atmosphere where this young cast with some wonderful character actors. But this young cast felt relaxed and free and honest. And I think they were affected by what Wedekin's brilliant script is about. I mean, this is a play rather, that was banned the first time it was done. When the first time it was done in New York, it was closed by the censors in like 3 days. When I did it in New York, we ran into pickets and articles against us from the religious right, from the people whose minds are locked in some medieval prison. And this is a film, a story, a play about honesty and about young people being allowed to breathe freely, and the experience of that, and approaching sexuality without fear. Without fear. And that's what it's about. And Wedekind was, not only in this play, but in Lulu, the Lulu plays, was brave not only beyond his time, but beyond our time. And the fact that the young people in the cast and the character people in the cast were able to approach these roles with integrity and with their complete honesty was very gratifying for me. It was truly a wonderful experience.
That's as much as one can ask from the work, isn't it? To have that kind of experience and produce that kind of product as well.
And I must say that Regent and Here are doing an extraordinary thing in creating this kind of television. It has been missing from the world of television since the days of Playhouse 90, Studio One, the great period, Hallmark Hall of Fame, of which I've done many, but there were halcyon years of Hallmark Hall of Fame, and things like Studio One and Playhouse 90 and Omnibus, where television was a creative force, was an energy, had a uniqueness and a passion behind it, which is largely, I'm afraid, missing. And for Regent and Here to step back in that arena and say, we're going to create this kind of programming, we're going to do this kind of challenging, exciting material, is so to be lauded and praised and welcomed and honored. It's a wonderful thing and is so important for our society.
Well, I appreciate you saying that very much. Paul and I, believe that the gay media niche that we have taken an investment position in as well as a creative position in really can be an appropriate springboard for this kind of work, because gay can mean smart.
Yes.
And we have a strong core audience for this kind of programming, which other broadcasters or programmers do not have, and hopefully bring it to an intellectual, smart audience. There's a huge opportunity. If all you have to do is look at TV today,
absolutely,
playing to the lowest common denominator. And I don't mean that as an elitist. I simply don't enjoy a lot of the reality programming and other things that are on, and I just don't watch it.
I don't watch it.
But I look avidly for, the masterpiece theater work that PBS does.
Exactly.
And just some of the great works of literature that are missing from television today. And, we are interested in doing more projects like this within the limitations of our resources, doing more ambitious projects. We're also really aggressively working with broadcasters in the UK and in Europe and elsewhere in the world, because there's an opportunity to bring excellent television from those countries over here as well. And there really isn't a home for that kind of programming.
The same thing has happened in features, and I know that Regent is the distributor of last year's Academy Award-winning foreign language film. There was a day when I was young when the best of foreign films would be available. You really have to fight to see them these days. And so both in that arena and what you've said about the world of television, I not only do I agree, but I support your efforts in every possible way I can.
I think there's a bit of an opportunity
Absolutely.
for us in that kind of programming.
And in terms of our society, one thing, as people who are not in the mainstream, as gay, lesbian, transgendered individuals, we are on the outside of a lot of what our society is constructed of. You can see the picture more clearly from the outside. There is a reason that an overwhelming, a disproportionate, I'll use those words, a disproportionate amount of the creativity that happens in theater and film and music comes from people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual. It's because the view is clearer from the outside. We see the terrain more clearly than those who are in the middle of the terrain. We see the injustices, we see the inequities, we understand the pain in a way that a lot of people have been either protected from or simply not made aware of because they're in the middle and they cannot step back and take a look.
This is an opportunity to help gay people have a voice. It's also an opportunity just to help people, really, across the board.
Yes.
Arthur, thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Thank you.